Yeah, I find that I've had to like learn to forgive myself when I deviate from my just kind of just that forgiveness. It's okay, and then keep on going, but it's definitely hard.
Yeah.
So can a plant-based bodybuilder be as big and cut as an animal, like a bodybuilder eating an animal based?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I know this to be factual because I've hung out with the best bodybuilders in the world. I'm friends with Jay Cutler. He's one of arguably the first, second, or third best bodybuilder in history. I've met Arnold Schwarzenegger a number of times. Ronnie Coleman, Phil Heath. I've been around these guys. Now they're all in the big, steroid bodybuilding industry. Steroids, anabolic drugs, growth hormone, all that. But they're also the ones that put bodybuilding on the map and made it what it is. And some of them, even at the highest level, have been plant-based. Tony Freeman is one example. He was one of the top 8 or so bodybuilders on the entire planet. So we're talking the top, 0.00001%. And he was plant-based. Yes, he was still using the anabolic drugs and all that, but they all are at that level. So to answer your question, you absolutely can. Even Phil Heath, who won more Mr. Olympia titles than anyone in history. I think he tied Lee Haney and Ronnie Coleman, or he's just one short. He tied Arnold Schwarzenegger. Anyway, he's one of the best. Mm-hmm. He was on record at the end of his career, where he was still in the best shape of his life, right when he was kind of finishing, that he was doing a mostly plant-based diet, and that his wife was vegan, and he was kind of leaning that way. And then Tony Freeman was another example, and there are other examples out there as well. And I see it in the pro bodybuilding world. I see it in the amateur bodybuilding world. That yes, you can get just as big, because at the end of the day, it's about how many calories you consume in relation to what you expend and the type of exercise that you do, and obviously the genetics that you have. And so it doesn't really matter that much the source of the protein when it comes to building muscle. What matters is that when it comes to massive amounts of animal protein consumption, history shows that these large bodybuilders just don't last very long. Many that I've met, I mean, some that were some of my favorites, I got photos with. One or two were even featured in my books or in magazine articles with me. Many of them passed away before age 45 because of the massive amount of animal protein that almost every single one of them had a heart attack or a cardiac event where their blood vessels shut down, blood flow couldn't get to the heart, and they died instantaneously. And that's not universally as a result of steroids. It's probably a combination of the two, but they're usually some of the largest consumers of animal protein that have these cardiac issues, the really massive bodybuilders. So the idea that you can get large amounts of plant protein without those adverse effects, which Dr. T. Colin Campbell showed in the China study, and I've talked to him about that in person recently, that you can still eat high protein plant-based diet and high calorie surplus and be as big as anybody else while doing it on a plant-based diet. And people have shown that unequivocally. It's there on the internet for people to see it. Some of the top bodybuilders in the world have done that.
And to tease out the difference between, the health issues from steroids as opposed to the health issues from animal products, you're not aware of any plant-based bodybuilders that did steroids that had any sort of heart attack or anything like that, are you?
No, not a single one. And there are plant-based bodybuilders who use steroids. I've met some of them in person. I've seen them on tour. They exist, and that's not my thing. I'm lifetime drug-free, but I'm not here to judge anyone else's behavior. And the fact that if some of the best bodybuilders in the world on steroids can be plant-based and moving forward the plant-based lifestyle and bringing awareness that yes, you can do this. Like, hey, all you, big bodybuilders, men and women alike, and everyone else in between, you can do this with a healthier diet, a more compassionate diet, a lifestyle that's easier on your organs. I mean, these guys, their bodies are just, ravaged from massive. And to be clear, for everyone listening, you're going to be shocked. I'm talking, so sit down for this. I'm talking for some bodybuilders eating in the same day, 5 chicken breasts, dozens of egg whites, 5 whey protein drinks, and then meat from all different animals, from cows, from fish, from chickens, all day long. I mean, we're talking 5, 6, 7, 8,000 calorie intake of largely animal protein all day long. This is exactly what shuts down the body. This is exactly what shuts down blood vessels. This is exactly what restricts blood flow. We know this. It's been shown over and over and over. And these bodybuilders just keep on dying. I've even talked to some of the best bodybuilders, most famous in the entire world, even recently while on tour at these major events like the Arnold Classic and all these other events. And they are concerned about many of their colleagues who are dying. Like so many of their bodybuilding colleagues are dying. And a lot of it has to do with the food, with especially the animal protein intake, because that's the common link we're seeing in all of them. So yes, thank you for clarifying that I don't know of a single, maybe it exists, but I don't know of a single person on a plant-based diet that had, steroid use that had some sort of cardiac event, heart attack, died the exact same way as all these other bodybuilders are. It's just not happening.
Okay, I'm going to take a question from the audience. Brenda, you're going to need to unmute yourself and then state where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, Brenda.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Thank you, Robert, for this great lecture. A lot of people talk about the benefits of sweating with cardiopulmonary exercise. And one of my favorite exercises is swimming, which you don't detect sweating. So am I still secreting toxins while swimming? Or am I not sweating while swimming? So I have to do land-based things to sweat toxins.
That is the first time I've heard that, Brenda. That is, I've never been asked that before. And I haven't given a whole lot of thought to it. I think, man, that's a tough question because, yeah, it would be hard to detect sweat, but through the exertion, especially swimming is tough, especially you go at a fast level. I would still think that process is still happening if you can't feel it or detect it, but I don't know for sure. If it's something you are concerned about, you could either do some extra exercise, in outside of a pool, or even, after you finish swimming, use a sauna, steam room, whatever, that kind of thing. But I would suspect that it's probably already happening. I mean, there's tons of athletes who swimming is their only main form of exercise, especially for swimmers, professional, amateur, Olympic, or just or all the college and high school swimmers and swimming enthusiasts. I imagine they're still getting nearly all of the benefits that other athletes are getting as far as sweating and getting stuff removed through their largest organ, through their skin. So I would think that's fine, but I'd never been asked that, and I'm not really an expert in that area, so I don't know. I don't know for sure, but it is a very interesting question. And if you're worried, just do a little bit of outdoor exercise or a little bit of work in the gym too, and I think you'll be fine.
Great. And so you went over the diet of a meat-eating bodybuilder. What does the diet of an elite plant-based bodybuilder look like?
It's not great. I'm just going to be honest. That's the thing. And maybe there's not enough time to fully explain that, but like bodybuilding as a sport is not the healthiest thing in the world. It's actually inherently unhealthy. Now, building your body, through exercise and all that is totally healthy. But the sport of bodybuilding, the extreme, posing up on stage is with as low body fat as possible, as much muscle definition as possible, dehydrated, all this kind of stuff, to look a certain way with a fake tan on under bright lights that make you look golden like a statue is an unhealthy lifestyle. It just is. End of story. So basically, people approach it slightly differently, but the diet of a regular bodybuilder, omnivorous bodybuilder, is something like meat and broccoli and rice for every meal. Super boring and tons of supplements. And so for a plant-based bodybuilder, it's like blocks of tofu and some leafy greens and maybe rice or sweet potatoes for every meal, plus usually a bunch of supplements. It is just super boring. When I competed, and for a decade, which I did, and I had some success. I even competed at the Natural Bodybuilding World Championships. I had an incredible transformation. I won multiple competitions. I was runner-up 4 times. I had a decent career. I would eat baked tofu, blocks of tofu. I would put it in the oven, I'd bake it, cover it with nutritional yeast and salsa, because salsa was only like 10 calories per serving. I wanted all this protein and everything. And I would eat just blocks of tofu that was flavored, that little slightly cheesy flavor of nutritional yeast. And I have spinach and salsa because they were low in calories. And then 5 protein drinks a day and this kind of stuff. And you're encouraged not to eat fruit. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so I stopped all of that a decade ago. And I've actually been bigger and stronger than I ever was as a competitive bodybuilder, even as I aged into my 40s, while doing this largely whole food, plant-based approach and no sports supplements for over a decade now, which was inspired by Dr. T. Colin Campbell. And so that's one of the things that I try to explain now. Now, I understand that to get the really extreme look, you're just probably not going to do that on a whole food, plant-based diet, because it's not all that natural. It's not normal to do that. You have to do these, cut out all these other calories and just drink protein drinks all day. So the diet of a plant-based bodybuilder is really quite awful, except for those who try to marry a healthier diet while still being as competitive as possible. And so there are some people that do that. I think Tori Washington is a good example of that. Natalie Matthews is a good example of that. But they're few and far between. Typically, the plant-based bodybuilding diet is pretty extreme, not all that enjoyable. In fact, I had some friends just compete last year who were miserable for months on end. And so I choose to do a bit of a healthier approach. I may not be quite as ripped, but I feel like I'm healthy, I'm strong, I'm in pretty good shape. I'll take it because I want to eat fruit. I want to eat more vegetables. I want to not do protein powders. I want to focus on longevity. I want to feel better. So that's what I do.
Great. All right, we'll take another question from the audience. Evelyn, where are you from? What's your question?
I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I want to talk to you about this whole deficit, how much of a deficit you really need to have every day. I mean, I think the typical American is kind of like the bear. So we're overeating and hibernating, which translates to overeating and then just sitting around all day. But that bear is converting that excess fuel from fruit into fat, knowing that they're not going to have to use that fat until the spring when they wake up and start moving around. So if I consume 500 excess calories a day, so let's say I have, birthday cake or whatever, some of that's going to go to glycogen for my muscles. But then the excess beyond that, excess from fat and excess from carbohydrates, within 24 to 36 hours, their body has to put that into storage because it has no other way to take care of it. And so that's going to go to visceral fat, right? And then that visceral fat is really locked in there, like the bear example again. So to convert that stored fat, it's much harder. So even if I really, really do CrossFit the next day or whatever, isn't it harder to get that stored fat to convert, especially if you're not metabolically flexible? Isn't it harder to get that to release out of your body, or is that an oversimplification?
That's a great question, Evelyn. And shout out to Albuquerque. My in-laws are in Santa Fe, so I go out there.
Yay, Santa Fe!
Yeah, I go out there a couple times a year to New Mexico to see my family, my in-laws. So that is a great question, and I think you're probably right that visceral fat is harder to get rid of because it compounds over time. So I think ultimately in that bear example, the goal is to try to mitigate the excess calorie consumption, maybe a smaller amount instead of 500 excess calories a day is another 3,500 a week. That's 14,000 or so extra calories a month, that kind of thing. But if we just have a smaller calorie surplus, perhaps, and if that calorie surplus is, ideally from lentils or sweet potatoes or blueberries or whatever, I think we might be able to burn some of that off or eliminate it or whatever, rather than having it just get stored as that visceral fat. So I think if we can avoid that in the first place by kind of limiting the amount of daily surplus, I think we'll be in a better position. But as far as you're right, doing CrossFit the next day, it's not necessarily just going right after the food you just had the day before. It's very difficult to do that, or to spot reduce or whatever. Fat removal. One thing that I found helpful, and I don't know the literature on it. I'm sure there probably is some literature on it. I just got to look into it. But one thing that I found helpful was to try to do some cardiovascular training in a fasted state, which, even if it just works psychologically, I don't know, but I would start my morning with fasted, rowing machine or Stairmaster, or going for a run or for a jog or whatever, and get myself into this, try to be as effective fat burning zone as possible before I would then, start to consume that day to help shed off some of those additional calories that were accumulating over time. And I found that to be quite helpful. But I've also heard that it doesn't really matter when you do cardiovascular training, whether it's in a quote unquote fat burning zone or not, because you factor in the whole 24-hour day. But for me, doing some cardio on an empty stomach, first thing in the morning or after weight training, I did find to be extra beneficial in burning fat and getting leaner. But I would have to look more into that whole energy storage thing, like a bear, and see how we can best target that over time.
Great, Robert. Thank you so much for your time. That concludes our Q&A. We really appreciate it. If we could unmute the audience so they can show their appreciation, that'd be great.
Hey,
Robert.
Thank you. Hey, Robert.